So we're back again, and remember we're talking about a predecessor activity and a successor. So a lag is a directed delay in that relationship. And a lead actually is going to accelerate the predecessor into the successor, right, for scheduling purposes. Now that's all I wanted to say about that, but we're able then to sequence activities. That's done. And you end up with a network diagram. Notice that there are no times associated with it. But I do see some things. I see path convergence, where D goes into C. Well, so does B. Those paths converge, right? And C and F converge into the finish. So that's increased risk for us as predictive or waterfall project managers. Now, there's a lot on this slide. Most of it's summary, easy to read. Pause and read it for yourself. But I wanted to point out that PMs should analyze first. To analyze can be done quickly. It doesn't have to be delayed, but analyze first. Also realize that there is no padding at all. That's a wrong answer on any exam. We do not pad. We build exact schedules and monitor them and learn lessons from them. Now, the next process is about estimating duration. So how do I do that? Well, frankly, the duration equals the work effort, WE, times the resource availability. Okay? The work effort times the resource availability. And in predictive project management, things don't always go well. I can't keep adding more people. If I double the staff, I don't double the productivity. I lose overall a little bit each time. Now in Agile, they will do estimating by doing relative sizing. So Agile is going to use relative estimates. Relative, good enough, close enough, that's fine, instead of absolute estimates. And the sizing uses a unit called a story point, right, which is a recognizable landmark. So just know that they do relative sizing using story points, okay? So when we estimate the durations, we have inputs, tools, and techniques, and outputs. And there are a number of ways to estimate. Really, let's go over them over the next couple of slides. I can do one-point estimating, which is some subject matter expert said. That's a one-point or expert judgment estimate. I can do analogous information estimating, which is using historical information from a similar or like activity to get a quick estimate. I can use parametric estimating, which is using historical data, not just historical information like analogous, but historical data and project parameters. It's frankly a statistical relationship, like price per square foot. I can also estimate using three-point estimating, and there are two types of that. One is triangular, which is the optimistic plus the most likely time plus the pessimistic divided by 3. It's a simple average. And I could do beta estimating. I could do beta, which is another form of three-point estimating, which is optimistic plus 4 times the most likely plus pessimistic divided by 6. This is a much more conservative average because it weights the most likely by a factor of 4. I'd write those down and know those for class as well as the others. I will also do data analysis, which includes reserve analysis. There are two types of reserve analysis: contingency reserves and management reserves. And there's information on those here and in the PMBOK guide. Now, this is a one-slide summary of all things three-point estimating. A three-point estimate that is has the weighted average is actually called PERT, Program Evaluation and Review Technique. that's PERT, okay? But both triangular and beta are forms of 3-point estimating. And you can read the slide here for more information. It's a good time to pause and make some notes. And so in continuing the estimating tools, Agile will estimate also. And Agile does a number of things. It can do affinity estimating by grouping or affinitizing the estimates. Sometimes they estimate, remember I said relative sizing? T-shirt sizes. They'll go small, medium, large, extra large. That's how you can estimate the length of a story, just in those blocks. Or I could do planning poker, they call it, where everybody hears the story and they hold up their hand to determine their support or non-support of the numbers, right? These are estimating approaches. Now here was, I mentioned back to predictive project management, these are contingency reserves, right? And a project manager identifies the risk in advance, addresses it with the sponsor, who then returns and says, great, for risk 1, which is a threat, here's some cash to cover it. And for risk 2, which is an opportunity, here's some cash to make that happen. Now, management reserves, notice the PM didn't identify the risk and so didn't have reserves set aside and had to go to the sponsor to ask, right? This will create a change request. Now, when we develop the schedule as the next process, this is going to give me my baseline, okay? And the schedule process model is what we're going to assess. And the output is this final approved baseline. So let's take a look at that. Why develop a baseline? Because that approved version of the schedule model is accepted by the stakeholders, and it gives us something to measure against, to compare against as our schedule unfolds. Now, when I develop the schedule, there are plenty of tools. I can do network analysis. So I analyze the schedule I've created before I finalize it. I can also use critical path method, which is one of the precedence diagramming methods we talked about. The other precedence diagramming method is critical chain. You'll only have to know that in theory for the exam, not in practicality. You will do the math of critical path. You can find more on that in the Rita book online and in the PMBOK guide also. And don't forget, you can do resource. These are other tools in developing the schedule. You want to optimize your resources. Sometimes resources pile up early and then you don't have them later. So you could do A or B. You could do resource leveling, which is going to balance the supply of these resources. And that's actually going to, when you level the resources, it's going to lengthen the schedule a little bit because you're leveling things out. But it gives you more predictability. Now, resource smoothing is actually going to adjust activities within the activity float. Some activities have float, a little extra time built in. It's not padding, it's waiting on another process because of, say, path convergence. And so in resource smoothing, the critical path doesn't change. In the resource leveling, it often leads to a change in critical path. Great test question. Now, to develop the schedule, there are some other tools I can use. I can do a what-if scenario analysis. Well, what if this? Well, what if this? Well, what if this? That's a what-if analysis. I can also use a program called a simulator. The most common is called the Monte Carlo simulation. I put a whole bunch of data in this program and it will tell me where my critical path is, where my schedule compression techniques I should use, etc. In fact, speaking of schedule compression, there are 2 types to know for the exam. I can fast track, which means that I take 2 items done in sequence, and I do them in parallel to fast track it. Or I could crash. So I could take 2 activities, right? And I can shorten the activities by adding resources to them, and that's crashing. Of course, crashing adds risks because you're doing it faster, and it adds costs because you're adding people. Fast tracking it could lead to rework. You want to be very careful about that because you're doing things in parallel now that you had planned to do in sequence. So the chance of rework goes up, and that's a risk to you. Okay. Then we have this schedule in Agile where it takes a slightly different form. But we'll discuss that more in class. Okay. In Agile, they talk about cumulative flows, right? What's the value I've completed? What's the work in progress? And what's the total value that I've achieved? Now, schedule network analysis comes next. And I said we would use the critical path method. It's a form of PDM. And so critical path defines the longest path in the network, which then becomes the shortest time that the project can be finished. Now, some of your processes are going to have float, or some of your activities are going to have float, which is slack is another name for it. And that's an allowable delay on an activity. It's an allowable delay because it's waiting on another activity to finish. There are 3 types of float: total float, free float, and project float. The definitions are here. I would pause and make a note of them. So here is a critical path method. So schedule network the network diagram would not have the numbers. Once I add the numbers, then I do network analysis. And if this is really the best approach, then I go with it, right? And this becomes my critical path method. Remember, critical path is the longest path in the project, but it's the shortest time that the project can be finished. And I'm using this box in predictive project management to determine my float. And here is what that diagram, and so we do a forward pass first. That's over the top of each activity till I get to the end. And then I do a backward pass to do the bottom of these in my schedule and network analysis. This is a 1-slide summary of that box, right? The forward pass from the early start to the early finish. I've already figured my duration that I had up front. And then the backward pass starts with the late finish for each node or activity and figures out the late start for each one. And that's the backward pass. And this is what it would look like itself. Now, wrapping it up, we'll save that example. I think it's self-explanatory, but in the end, can there be more than one critical path? Yes. Do you want there to be? No. Can a critical path change? Yes. Can there be negative float? Yes, but you want to fix that. Get back to 0 float on the critical path. How much float does a critical path have? It has 0. Okay? So now we have developed the schedule. And after that, we have our schedule baseline and we're ready to control. Right? In control, notice I want to compare my project plan versus my data, use tools, and in the output I get work performance information, change requests, plan, and project updates. Those are typical. The only new one is a schedule forecast. And here is my 1-slide summary of all things in schedule management. Review that, get to know it. It's your good friend. And I look forward to the readings and talking about this in class.